morning, everybody. It's very nice to be here with you today. First rule, put all the cell phones away. All right, I'm going to actually turn mine off right now. Okay, we're all set? I'm going to start on a pretty somber note this morning, and I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection for all of you here in Geneva. GDP is growing at a slower rate all over the world, everywhere. The reason this is happening is productivity has been declining all over the world for the last 15, 20 years. The result is we've got a lot of high unemployment, especially among the millennial generation, trying to find some decent work in a 21st century workforce. Our economists are projecting 20 more years of low productivity, slow growth. And let me do the numbers for you. We've had two industrial revolutions in the 19th century, the 20th century. And here's where we stand today. Arguably, half the human race, all of us in the West, are far better off than our ancestors were before we began this industrial way of life. Is that granted? I think it's also fair to say that 40% of the human race making $2 a day or less are not really appreciably any better off than their ancestors were before we began this experiment. And for the 1 billion people making $1 a day or less, I think we have to say they're worse off than their ancestors were. So while half the human race has done much better, the other half of the human race only marginally better, the very wealthy among us have really, really done well. This morning, the 7 richest people in the world, we could put them right here in this row, 7 people. Their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human population living on this planet. That's 3.5 billion people. There is something so dysfunctional about the way the human family is organizing its economic and social life. There's no precedent for this in history. It's clear that the great industrial revolution of the 20th century is on a steep decline, but now we have a more serious crisis. After 2 centuries and 2 industrial revolutions, where essentially they were built on the carbon assets of a previous period of history, we went under the ground, we dug up all the carbon remains, organic remains of a previous geological period in history, and we took those assets and we created the entire industrial way of life. In the process, we paid the entropy bill. We have massive amounts of CO2 spewed into the atmosphere, and methane, and nitrous oxide, and it's as simple as this. The sun hits the earth, and then some of the sun tries to go, the rays, the energy tries to get back out, but it's hitting all those CO2 molecules and the methane and nitrous oxide molecules, and it keeps that heat back down on the planet. We are in real-time climate change. This is no longer a theory or a model or looming on the horizon. It's here this morning in Geneva and all over the world. What's terrifying about climate change is never explained to humanity, because what I'm about to explain to you, if we told everybody what this is in 2 minutes, the whole human race this morning would be justifiably terrified and at the same time committed over the next 3 generations to save our planet, save our species, and save our fellow creatures. Here's what climate change does. It changes the water cycles of the planet. We are the watery planet. Our ecosystems have developed over millions of years based on the hydrological regimes, the precipitation that traverses the cloud covers and rains down on the ecosystems. Here's the rub. For every 1 degree that the temperature is going up on this Earth from industrial-induced global warming emissions, every 1 degree rise in temperature, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat on the ground is forcing the precipitation into the clouds. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds, in more extreme, totally dramatic, and completely unpredictable water events. Blockbuster winter snows, 7, 8 feet in Boston. That's the new abnormal. We are getting flooding all over the world in every ecosystem across Europe, Africa, Asia, the Americas, and we are seeing ecosystems on the verge of collapse, infrastructure being destroyed, and lives taken. Every year it's getting worse. We are getting summer droughts and wildfires everywhere. In the west coast of the United States and Canada, every year millions of acres are burning. We had 14,000 buildings in one city destroyed in one day from the fires. This is happening everywhere. That's the new normal. We're getting Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. In my country alone, Katrina and Sandy and Irving and Harvey, every summer, those hurricanes are destroying parts of Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina. The floods are so severe they can't make up for the last year and the new year and can't even rebuild. This is the new normal. Our ecosystems cannot catch up to this shift in the water cycles, and they're collapsing in real time because they depend on a fairly consistent water regime over millions of years. Our scientists now tell us we are in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth, and it doesn't even make the headlines. How many here actually know this? I mean, honestly, how many know? How many don't? Just honestly. Most people do not know, and this is the most dramatic story the human race has ever faced. This morning, they just announced this morning a new study that the ice in the Antarctic, that massive continent, is melting at 288 times the speed they thought it was. The entire continent. The Arctic's melting, the Antarctic, seawater rise. We've got over half the population of the world on coastal cities that will be devastated in the lifetime of your children. As my wife says, we're asleep. The last time our current extinction event projects that we'll lose 50% of all the major life forms by the time some of you are my age. The last time we had an extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago, and it took thousands of years, not 8 decades. So what do? We need a new economic vision for the world. It better be damn well compelling. And we need a game plan to deliver on it, and it has to come quick. The UN Climate Panel, which is made up of all the academies of sciences around the world, issued a report in October saying we got 12 years left now. Should have done this 30 years ago. We have 12 years left to transform the entire economic system of the world out of carbon-based fuels across every sector, or we won't make it, because then we'll go over 1.5 degrees temperature, and then the feedback loops are going to take us. So what do? We need to step back for a moment and ask the pretty important question. How do the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur? If we know how they occur, we're going to get a roadmap and a compass here in Switzerland and in every other country in the world that can allow us a speedy exit and hopefully a razor-thin path to decarbonize the world in less than 15 years. It's theoretically still possible. So, how do the great economic paradigm shifts occur? There's been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history. They're really interesting anthropologically because they share a common denominator. At a moment of time across a society, 3 defining technologies will emerge and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform, an infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way society manages, powers, and moves its economic life, social life, and governance. What are those 3 defining technologies through history? Number 1, new communication technologies to more efficiently manage our economic life, social life, and governance. That's obvious, right? Number 2, new forms of energy to more efficiently power our economic, social life, and governance. That's obvious. Number 3, new modes of mobility and transportation logistics to more efficiently move our economic, social life, and governance. When communication revolutions join with new energy regimes, new modes of mobility and logistics, it does change the way we manage, power, and move our day-to-day lives. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our business models. It changes our governance. It changes our habitats. It changes our worldviews. I'm going to give you two quick examples. First Industrial Revolution, Great Britain, 19th century. Second Industrial Revolution, United States, 20th century. So the Brits take us into the first Industrial Revolution with a complete convergence of new technologies for communication, energy, mobility, which changed the built environment. The Brits invent steam-powered printing. No more manual German print presses, too slow. Steam-powered printing, very fast. So they could now produce massive amounts of textbooks for new public school systems emerging around the world, and journals and newspapers and magazines and brochures for advertising, etc. Then the Brits laid out a telegraph system in the last half of that 19th century. Steam-powered printing and the telegraph. Those communication technologies converged with a new source of energy at the time, coal, from the hinterlands of Britain. And then the steam engine, which was used to negotiate the coal energy, they put it on railroad tracks for locomotives. Communication, energy, mobility, manage power, and move life. 20th century, second industrial revolution in the United States, again, communication, energy, mobility, built environment. By the way, the first industrial revolution took us from agricultural living and small villages and a few large cities to dense urban industrial areas because you had hub-to-hub railroad traffic for your logistics. Second industrial revolution in the United States, the telephone. I know everyone thinks the internet's a big deal in this room, but you got to imagine this. Out of nowhere, for the first time in history, after 200,000 years on this planet, we have a little device that allows people to connect with each other virtually, and their voice travels across the ether to someone else thousands of miles away. It was an extraordinary communication revolution. Later in the United States, radio and television. These communication technologies converged in America with a new source of energy, cheap Texas oil wells. They came in. Then Henry Ford put everybody in the internal combustion engine powered by that fossil fuel. And we went from dense urban industrial life, hub-to-hub rail, to suburban life across roads and interstate highways and shopping malls and travel and tourism and everything else we know. The second industrial revolution took the whole world through the 20th century. It peaked July 2008. Some of you may remember that month. In that month, the price of Brent crude oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets. That was a record. The entire global economy shut down July 2008. That was the great economic earthquake of the industrial age from the 20th century. The collapse of the financial market and subprime mortgage market a month later was an aftershock, because you couldn't keep this fictional Ponzi scheme going on the sub-mortgage market when the real economy turned down. Why was this the earthquake? Everything in this civilization depends on fossil fuels, fertilizers, pesticides, construction materials, pharmaceutical products, chemical preservatives for the food, synthetic fiber, power, transport, heat, and light, all of it. So when the price of oil goes over 80 a barrel, watch all the other prices go up. When the price of oil goes over a zone of 110 a barrel, watch prices start to slow down across the supply chains. We are now in a convulsive endgame for an industrial age based on fossil fuels. Oil goes down to $30 a barrel now to wipe out their new competitors, shale gas, tar sands, because they're not competitive under 40. And once they wiped them out 2 years ago and bankrupted, then oil went back to 70. Now shale gas is coming back and tar sand. They're fighting each other for an end game. And wherever we have oil, with the exception of Canada and the United States, I suspect, we have failed states or authoritarian regimes. Does anyone in this room here in Geneva this morning believe we are still in the sunrise of the fossil fuel era? No. Yeah. So what are we doing here? Let me share an anecdote with you. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first couple of weeks of her new government to help her address the question of how to grow the German economy, create jobs, and move Germany forward. The first thing I asked the new Chancellor, Madam Chancellor, I said, how do you grow the German economy when your businesses are plugged into a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuels, nuclear power, internal combustion, road, rail, water, and air transport, and that infrastructure to manage, power, and moved your economic life, your social life, and governance, that infrastructure peaked in its productivity 15, 20 years ago. This is the key. Economists are wondering, why is productivity lagging when we have all these new digital technologies coming on board, correct? Why is it still lagging? I'm going to spend some moments on trying to explain why our economists are a little bit lost. In traditional economic theory, we like to say that productivity is based on better machines. You need more capital for better machines and better performing workers. But when Robert Solow won the Nobel Prize for economic growth theory in the 1980s, he let this little embarrassing secret out that no economist wants to talk about. He said, actually, when you trace the entire Industrial Revolution, better machines and better performing workers is only 14% of the productivity. Where's the other 86% come from? We don't know. Are you shocked economists don't know? That should be the one thing they do know. Here's why they don't know, a little divergence. When economics was penned in the late 1700s, the vogue was Newton's mechanics, Newton's physics. So everybody wanted to borrow his metaphors. He had unlocked the secrets of the universe. So the philosophers did the same thing. You know Newton's law, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction? Does that sound familiar? Adam Smith borrowed that for the invisible hand. For every action on the supply side, there's an equal and opposite reaction on the demand side. How about Newton's law? Body in motion stays in motion, less disrupted. Sound familiar? Baptists say, the French economist borrowed that for his theory that, you know, supply will stimulate demand, which will generate supply, which will stimulate demand and less disrupted. The only thing wrong with using Newton's physics to define economics is Newton's physics has nothing to do with economics. Nothing. Except maybe friction. Economics is based on the same laws that govern the universe, the solar system, the biosphere, the economy of Geneva, and everything you startups are doing in this room today. These are the first and second laws of thermodynamics. The first law of energy in the universe, all the energy that's been here in the universe has been here since the Big Bang. Nothing created, nothing destroyed since. The second law says, true, the energy's always been here, not created, not destroyed, but is changing form always, but only in one direction. From concentrated, the Big Bang, to dispersed through the galaxies. From hot, the Big Bang, to dispersed and cold through the galaxies. And from order to disorder through the galaxies. Entropy is a measure of energy still here, not available to do useful work. So, there are three types of thermodynamic systems. An open system exchanges matter and energy, and matter is a form of energy, with the outside world. A closed system exchanges energy, but not matter. And an isolated system doesn't exchange either. We are B. We get lots of energy from the sun, no problem. But the fixed matter, which is a form of energy, it's been here since we blew off the sun and cooled off. All those smart earths, those rare earths in your smartphones, we're not getting any more. We get a little meteorite dust and cosmic dust here, that's it. Here's what economics is about. We take low entropy available energy and material out of the earth, a rare earth for your smartphone, metallic ore for the automobile, fossil fuels. We extract them, ship them, store them, make things out of them, consume them, and recycle them. At every step of conversion across the supply chains, we have to embed, and listen to this for your businesses, a certain amount of energy and material into that good or service to get it to the next stage of what it becomes across its journey on the supply chains. In the process, we lose some energy and material in every single conversion. That's the laws of thermodynamics, and it's called aggregate efficiency in engineering. Aggregate efficiency is the ratio of the potential work to the actual useful work that gets embedded at every stage in your supply chain, and that which gets lost in the process. Here's the way it works in nature. A lion chases down an antelope, kills it, devours it. About 10 to 20% of the total energy in that antelope gets into the lion. The rest is heat lost in the conversion. That's its aggregate efficiency. What does this have to do with my conversation with the Chancellor of Germany? She's a physicist by background. I said, look, the United States started off the Second Industrial Revolution at 3% aggregate efficiency across its supply chains. We lost 97% in every conversion, all right? We got up to about 13% aggregate efficiency in the late 90s. That was our ceiling in the US. Nothing has changed. Germany got up to 18.5% aggregate efficiency. That was their ceiling 10 years later. Nothing's changed. Japan led the world at 20% aggregate efficiency. That was their ceiling. So I said to the Chancellor, you can have market reforms, labor reforms, fiscal reforms. You can stimulate 1 million Steve Jobs and startups. It will not make any difference if they're plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure, a centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel, nuclear power, internal combustion transport, because that infrastructure to manage, power, and move your supply chains, your value chains, your life, productivity peaked 20 years ago. So on that first day with the chancellor, we discussed a third industrial revolution, the new convergence of communication, energy, mobility, and logistics to manage, power, and move Germany. At the end of the day, she said, Jeremy, we will have this for Germany. And what I'm about to talk to you now this morning is what you're all doing here. But you have to move it from siloed pilot projects to an infrastructure to plug in. We have a communication internet. It's been 27, 28 years since Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web. We have 3.5 billion people connected. Pretty soon the whole human race will be connected. China now has a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. There are people now in the Amazon in villages with those little power, those devices, they have more power than sent our guys to space, all right? Now this communication internet's moving to 5G big data, and it's just now beginning to converge with a renewable energy internet. Here in Europe, we now have millions of people who are literally producing their own solar and wind, and they're sharing it off-grid or sending it back to the grid. We now have millions in China where we're working as well, doing the same thing, and parts of the west coast of the United States, and Texas, actually, and California. Now these two internets, communication internet to manage the economic social life, the energy internet to power economic social life, are now converging with a third internet, a mobility and logistics internet made up of millions and millions of vehicles in the next 30 or 40 years. They will be electric, they will be fuel cell, they will be powered by solar and wind electricity from the renewable energy internet. They will provide the storage necessary for that energy internet, and they will be guided by GPS in autonomous road, rail, water, and air systems, driverless. These three internets, the communication internet moving to 5G, the renewable energy internet, all digitalized so that we can share energy just like we share information with digital technology. And now the mobility and logistics internet so we can share our transportation logistics services with each other using the same digital technology as we use in sharing information, news, entertainment, and energy. These three internets to manage, power, and move life are now riding on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is not the cloud, it's the things. So we're putting sensors across the entire landscape of the planet, both the built landscape and the wild. Sensors in the agricultural fields monitoring the crops, sensors in factories and in warehouses and in smart homes and in smart vehicles and in smart roads. They're monitoring big data in real time. And they're sending it to the emerging communication internet, energy internet, and mobility internet so all of us can better manage, power, and move our value chains, whether it's families, businesses, or communities. By 2030, we'll have ubiquitous interconnectivity. We're creating essentially a prothesis of the human mind and nervous system. The mind is GPS and Galileo, and it orchestrates and synchronizes the nervous system, which are all the senses. And they are embedded in the building stock. The buildings are transformed. Remember I said first industrial revolution in dense urban life, second suburban life. The third, every building becomes a node. Every building becomes totally retrofitted to make it energy efficient. And then it becomes a distributed data center because we're not going to be relying on centralized data centers at Amazon and Facebook and Google and Alibaba. Every building will be a node. It will be a distributed data center, blockchained. And it will also be a micro power generation site for solar, wind, on or around the sites. And it will be a charging stations for your electric and fuel cell vehicles. And those nodes across the buildings connect up nodally across continents. Communication, energy, mobility internets on top of the Internet of Things. This means by 2030, potentially a big leap forward for humanity. We can now connect the whole human race in real time at low fixed costs and near zero marginal cost. This means a vast potential expansion of social entrepreneurialism on a scale we've never seen. It means a comeback for cooperatives in a big way, blockchained across regions and across continents. It also means a fundamental shift in globalization. The first and second industrial revolution infrastructures, the platforms to manage power and move economic life, they were designed engineering-wise, to be centralized. They were organized top-down. They had to be enclosed in intellectual property to return enough investment to the capitalists that provided for it. And they had to do that by vertically integrating economies of scale with giant institutions across the globe. So we ended up today, this year, with 500 global companies. They control 1/3 of the GDP of the world, and they only have 62 million workers out of a workforce of 3 billion. What's happening now as we move to a distributed system, the new system, communication, energy, mobility, and IoT, is designed to be distributed, not centralized. It works best if it's open and transparent, open source, so you get the network effect, correct? And it scales laterally, networks and blockchains. This is allowing us to move from globalization top-down to glocalization. Regions now and cities and localities are beginning to connect with each other all over the world because the fixed costs are low and the marginal costs are near zero, and you can engage in supply chains, value chains, marketing, and advertising at really extremely low cost. This is a lateralization of power, literally and figuratively power to the people, the digital revolution. So that's the basic framework. So where do we go from here? The third industrial revolution creates new opportunities, but it also creates a lot of dangers. There's the dark net. And I want to tell you the dark net is as impressive as the bright net. How do we deal with network neutrality when everyone's connected? How do we ensure governments don't purloin this to hack the elections of other governments? Already happening. How do we ensure internet companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Alibaba don't monopolize this infrastructure and commodify our lifetime value in data for third parties? Already happening. How do we protect privacy? How do we ensure data security? How do we prevent malware or terrorist attacks? How do we operate when there's climate change events that take down the system? This is the dark net. It's as impressive as the bright net. And what we're going to need to do is spend 30 years in political struggle to ensure that these infrastructures are controlled as commons governance in every region, locality, commons governance, public utilities. They can be managed by private sector. They can even be built, but they can't be owned. Because this is the way we connect with each other to create a new world. Commons governance. Lots of cooperative governments. So let's assume we can deal with the dark net. We're going to have to build a lot of redundancy in the net, so the more distributed the system, the less vulnerable you are to breakdown here in Switzerland. So if there's a climate event or a terrorist attack, you can go off the grid, decentralize, localize, and then re-aggregate in blockchains at any moment, anywhere. And when you can do that all over the world, no centralized attack's going to get you. So here's the bright net. Let's say you have a small and medium-sized enterprise or cooperative here in Switzerland. You can already go up on the internet and you can see some of the data flowing through the system that you care about. Pretty soon you'll be able to see all the data if it stays open and neutral. Then you can strip the data you care about for your SME. For your supply chain, you have a lot of data you would like for your supply chain, right? You can strip it out of all the data going through that communication, energy, mobility, IoT infrastructure and download it, and then you can mine that data for your supply chain or value system with your own analytics. Create your own algorithms and apps. So you can dramatically increase your aggregate efficiency at every step of conversion across your value chains and supply chains for your business, dramatically reduce your fixed cost and marginal cost, and be competitive in a globalized world. That's starting to emerge in this room. What's the problem is you're still in isolated pilots. You haven't created the infrastructure. The infrastructure is what's going to give you all the jobs in helping to create that infrastructure. Without the infrastructure, you're dead in the water. We have 9,000 cities that signed up for the climate change in Paris. And I tell you, they all have great projects. They've got hydrogen buses, and they've got LEED buildings, and they've got bike paths, and nothing's happening because they haven't put in the infrastructure to plug into, to manage power and move their value chains. So we've already seen the impact of what this is potentially can do. And that is that as we've moved this system into place, it's basically changed the nature of capitalism. It's basically changed the nature of capitalism. Because the fixed cost of digital technology are dramatically plunging, and the marginal cost is near zero. So that means when you're, in economics, we always teach our young business people that the optimum market is where you sell at marginal cost. All right, because then you want to put out cheap products, you want to win over consumers, you want to bring a little a profit back to your shareholders, right? So you always want to sell at marginal cost. It's just we never expected a technological revolution, digital, where it would be so powerful that it would reduce marginal cost to near zero, which is the ultimate success of capitalism, but it shifts the entire way you do business. Because when your marginal costs go low, your profits go low, correct? So it's going to make a shift from markets to networks, from ownership to access, from sellers and buyers to provider-user networks, from consumerism to sustainability, from externalities to circularity, from productivity to generativity. So markets are too slow. They're transactional. I introduced this at Wharton Executive Ed back in 2000. In a market, you got a seller, you buyer, right? You come together, you have a moment of time, you alienate the property or service from the seller to the buyer. Then you have downtime. Then you have to bring the parties together. You need advertising. You need marketing. You have to worry about your storage, your logistics. They're too slow in a world that's moving too fast. So when your margins get low, you have to move from a market to a network and blockchain across competencies and operate webs where you're providing services 24/7. There's no start-stop mechanism. There's no transaction stop. It's a flow of activity. So even at low margins, when you have a long flow of activity 24/7, you can maintain your margins. Some of the margins are going so low that in some goods and services it's head to near zero marginal cost, and that's the subject of the book, the zero marginal cost society, and this has created a new economic phenomenon, the sharing economy. It's a baby. It was birthed by capitalism. We didn't see it coming. But this is the first new economic system to enter onto the world stage since capitalism and socialism in the 19th century. This is a remarkable event. Some of it is being absorbed into the capitalist system, like Uber. Some of it is completely detached from that system, like Wikipedia. There is going to be a struggle. But already, all of you in this room today, part of the day you're sharing goods and services for free, not covered in the GDP, and part of the day you're in a capitalist system that's moving from markets to networks. Do I have this right? This is not going to go away. So let's see how this has affected the various components of communication, energy, and mobility. We now have 3.5 billion people on the internet who are prosumers. They are sharing their own music. Remember Psy, the Korean performance artist? He brought 3 billion people to his website, and his little song and dance cost nothing. It was done on a digital recorder. 3 billion people, it didn't cost him a thing, not in the GDP. We got millions of young people producing and sharing their own social media, their own videos on YouTube, open source. And we've got millions of people on Wikipedia, the 6th largest website in the world, nonprofit, costs $50,000 in charity a year. And actually, it would probably be the number one website. If you eliminate the porno websites, I think it's number 1. Right now, it's listed as number 6. We'll take that. So I don't know how Jimmy Wales came up with this, but we've got millions of people who have constructed the knowledge of the world in a democratic fashion for free. It's no longer elite knowledge from the top down. And everyone apparently has nothing else to do but check everyone else's accuracy. Because I put something up on the web, within an hour, people crawling all over that sentence. I don't like this, amplify it, where's the edits, I don't see this, but it works. Democratized education. We've got millions of young people taking massive open online college courses taught by the best professors, the best universities. They're getting college credit. Now, there's a big dropout rate. You need to blend it with physical on-campus stuff, but it's not going away. This is a revolution. So, it's not just that big companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter have emerged, but also all of you in this room are doing startups. Some of them profit, and some of them nonprofit, and you're creating the platforms and the apps and the connections, correct? You're mining the data. We thought there'd be a firewall. We could understand how Near zero marginal cost would impact the digital world of bits, information, news, knowledge, and entertainment. We just didn't think it'd go over the firewall to the physical world of things. The Internet of Things broke the firewall down. Millions of people now producing their own solar and wind at near zero marginal cost. Within 25 years, everyone will be. You know, we're putting sensors in paint to collect the solar and in glass. All you have to do is paint your house, put in the glass. Everyone's going to be producing their own energy. We have millions of young people sharing car sharing services now all over the world. So let's go back to Germany. What's happened since that first conversation with the chancellor? 35% of our electricity in Germany, this has all happened in 11 years, a third of our electricity is now zero marginal cost solar and wind. We'll be 100% off fossil fuels, off coal, off everything before 2040, probably quicker, solar and wind. What's really motivated this drive, and you should know this, is that the fixed costs have been on an exponential curve for solar and wind, just like computers. Now, when I was a kid, we didn't have computers in the 1940s and early 50s. The first computer was at my university, UNIVAC, University of Pennsylvania. At the time that the first computer was invented, the chairman of IBM predicted we would need 5 computers for the world, tops. 5. Okay, too expensive. No one saw the Intel engineers coming up with computer chips where they could double the capacity and half the cost every 2 years. Now, smartphone, $25. We've had the same exponential curve in solar and wind. Now it's becoming apparent. In 1978, to produce 1 solar watt, fixed cost, $79. You have it? Today, you know what the fixed cost is to produce that solar watt? It's not $79. 40 cents. 35 cents in 18 months. It's plunging like computer chips. And what's interesting is the marginal cost, because once you produce this solar and wind, the marginal cost is free. In Germany, you know the sun has not sent us a single invoice. The wind had no charge. So how does a second industrial revolution country compete with a third industrial revolution economy when you can plug in your businesses to an infrastructure where the energy you use across your value chains is near zero marginal cost and free of carbon? Someone should tell the White House this. So, who's producing all of this new electricity? There are 4 major power companies in Germany. Keep thinking digital. There are 4 major power companies, EMBW, RWE, Vattenfall, and E.ON. We thought they were invincible 12 years ago, and here's what's happened. What happened to them is what happened to the music industry, book publishing, newspapers, and it happened quick. It happens when actually about 10 to 12 to 14%, when you get 10, 12, 14% of the market, the old order collapses. So what's happened here is millions of people in Germany and around Europe, they created cooperatives. Farmers, small businesses, local neighborhoods, they all got loans from the banks. Banks knew they would pay back by the energy they generated. They had to put a little subsidy on so you get more money for the solar and wind you did, but now we don't need it because we're below parity. We got on and off subsidies in 10 years. And you know how much the fossil fuel industry has still in subsidies at the end of its age? Take a guess. $4 trillion a year around the world. So what's happened is we have seen power to the people, just like in communication, where you can have power to the people, everybody networking, open source, we now have it in energy. They're producing off-grid, sharing some of it back to the grid. Does this mean the end of the power and utility companies? Not necessarily, but they have to change their business model. So in 2008, E.ON asked if I would meet with their chairman, Mr. Tyson, still there. We had a 2-hour debate. I said, look, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning, but the disruption's going to come in the next 4 to 5 years. And if you don't deal with it within 2 years, you're gone. The transition's 20 years. The disruption's 2 to 3. Small window. And I said, you need to take your old utility and electricity business and make it a legacy business. Then, in order to deal with the stranded assets, you've got to have a new model for the third industrial revolution. In the new model, you make more money by not generating any electricity. 96% of all the electricity being generated in Germany now, solar and wind, for the 21st century, is cooperatives. Power to the people. The big power companies can't scale it because you gotta actually collect the sun everywhere and the wind everywhere. How does a big company get the entire real estate of the planet? They can't do it. They can't do it. The buildings will do it. The neighborhoods will do it. So I said, in the new power system, you make money, you don't generate any energy for electricity, and you make more money by selling less and less electricity. He said, you are out of your mind. I said, here's what you do. You're going to set up partnerships with thousands of businesses, and you're going to help manage the energy flowing through their systems, and the entire electricity grid is going to be digitalized within the next 5 years. We're already doing it. All digital, so people can produce and share energy just like they produce information and share it. It's all digital. So you will help thousands of companies with their supply chains. You'll help them managing the energy data through their supply chains. You'll help them with their analytics and creating their algorithms so they can dramatically increase their aggregate efficiency at every step of their supply and value chains. In return, those thousands of businesses are going to share those aggregate efficiency gains back with you, the electricity company, in performance contracts. He went like this. He waited too long. 2 years ago, he put his fossil fuel and nuclear on the market like I said he should do. No one's buying them. They're stranded. A lot of money. He's moved to energy services. So is RWE, so is EMBW, so is Vattenfall, and EDF in France. They've joined us in northern France. My global team is in the 6th year of the deployment of all of northern industrial France, Haute France. EDF has been with us on the ground since get-go. They're not leaving nuclear tomorrow, but they see the transition coming. It's not just Europe, now China. Very interesting. This was a surprise. I had never worked in China, never been in China. When Premier Li and President Xi came in, Premier Li put out his official biography. They both did. And it was quite a surprise to me. Up front, Premier Li said he had read the book, The Third Industrial Revolution, and he'd instructed the State Council and the Development Reform Commission to move on the themes I'm outlining with you this morning. They move so fast, I need to tell you. I've been doing official visits with the leadership ever since. 11 weeks after my first visit, 11 weeks later, the chairman of the National Electricity Grid of China, the biggest in the world, announced $82 billion in the current 5-year plan now to totally digitalize the entire electricity grid so millions of Chinese people could buy their own solar and wind because they're the largest producers of solar and wind in the world, but they were exporting to us. Now they're bringing it back to the domestic market, solar and wind everywhere, so people could produce their own electricity, share it locally, or send it back to the grid. That's operationalizing now in the 3rd year of the 5-year plan in real time. Where's the United States? Watch Europe, European Union, watch China. Europe is leading it every step of the way. Watch Europe, watch China. The coming together of the communication internet with the renewable energy internet, both digitalized so we can exchange information, news, entertainment, and energy, now it's heading to mobility. We built the entire 20th century second industrial revolution on automobiles. It's called Fordism. Make the automobiles, everything else comes. The suburban rollouts, the consumer traffic, everything. Here's the problem. You're the problem. How many of you are under the age of 39 this morning? Raise your hands. 39 and under. How many of you are 39 and under? You are the problem. Apparently you've decided you don't want to own an automobile. That's grandma and grandpa, 2 cars, sitting in the driveway, waxing them, or at the workplace doing nothing, right? You want mobility. You want access to mobility and car sharing services, not ownership of static vehicles sitting there most of the time in markets. Do I have that correct? For every car you're sharing, we're eliminating between 7 and 15 automobiles. What does this mean? We have 1 billion cars, buses, and trucks choking us in traffic around the world. They're the number 4 cause of global warming. Number 1 is buildings. Anybody know what number 2 is, which no one ever talks about? We're spending a lot of time on buildings and transport. Yeah, cows. So I wrote a book on this in 1990 called Beyond Beef, and I was pilloried saying, you are lost your mind, that's absurd. We now know it's beef production and consumption because cows take up 27% of the non-ice land mass of the world, 27%. 1.3 billion cows. I love cows. My wife and I are animal rights people. But the methane they produce is 23 times more potent per molecule than CO2. And the nitrous oxide in their feces is 288 times more powerful per molecule than CO2. Yet even political leaders, how many governments have you heard anyone make a statement on this? And even environmental leaders that you watch on films and TV, even environmental groups, for fear that we'd have to change our diet, move down the food chain. We're lost if we can't even have that conversation. But let's take transport. We've got 1 billion vehicles. We're going to eliminate 800 million of those, given the statistics we know now, in the next generation. The other 200 million will be electric. They'll be fuel cell. They'll be 3D printed with fabrication, recycled material. Ford, Daimler, they're already working on it. They will be autonomous and driverless on road, rail, water, and air at very low marginal cost. 14 countries have now announced they are outlawing the internal combustion engine somewhere between 2030 and 2045. It is over. They're decoupling. So the electricity utilities are decoupling from fossil fuels quickly. Do you follow me? And now transport is decoupling. And now housing. All right? So what do I mean by housing? Remember I said the buildings, commercial, residential, and industrial, will be the nodes and the data centers and the micropower generation sites and the power plants and the charging stations. Many, many companies are now establishing their industries so they're solar and wind and don't have to rely on the grid. Google, Apple, Amazon, all the big ones, their data centers are all solar and wind, totally 100%. They don't have to rely on the grid at all. They can send electricity back. But this is now going to happen across all of the communities around the world. Decoupling and housing is the third largest emitter, I believe it is now, of global warming emissions. So there's some movement here. Not small movement, big movement. What's missing is taking all of the digital expertise in this room and building out the infrastructure to connect 5G big data communication internet with a digitalized renewable energy internet, a digital mobility internet running on autonomous vehicles, all on top of an Internet of Things platform. And the businesses here can help build out that 15-year infrastructure, and it might get us to post-carbon in time because the price is right. What's crippling the fossil fuel industry is solar and wind are now below parity in some places and at parity, and they're continuing to drop. The market has spoken. So it doesn't make any difference in some ways what the oil companies do or special interests. The market has now spoken. It's not going to change. This is the opportunity. What it means is in this room, we need a whole digital generation to begin to understand this narrative and understand how to put this infrastructure together in your communities and regions. We have two plans. One is called Smart Europe, and one is called Internet Plus China. We developed these plans with both of the leaderships of these countries. Smart Europe was announced last in 2017 with Maros Sefcovic, the Vice President of the European Commission, and Maku Makula, the President of the Committee of the Regions. I joined them. We have 741 billion euros in the Juncker Fund to lay out this infrastructure. We do not believe nation states will do this. We believe nation states will create codes, regulations, standards, and incentives. We believe local regions, in your case cantons, regions, provinces, will lay this out. Because of the nature of the engineering, it's distributed, it's open, it's transparent, it has to be laterally scaled, so you need to move to globalization. Each community and region has to take the architecture we've just described, set up a 20-year construction site, bring the whole regions together and operationalize. And the way we're operationalizing it is by something called peer assemblages. For example, Haute-de-France. Some of you have visited northern industrial France, Lille, Amiens, that's the home of Marie Le Pen and Macron, et cetera. So a number of years ago, they asked our global team of engineers and architects and urban planners, will you do a plan for us? And I said, no, we're not going to do a plan for you. It'll sit on the shelf. Everyone does plans, and you get a pilot. But I said, if you, the president of the region, go and you get every municipality lined up, every political party, all the universities and high schools, all the chambers of commerce, and all the think tanks together to create a collaborative peer assemblage, we'll come in and we'll help, but you draw the plan based on this narrative. They said, we've never seen this anywhere in the world. You said, we're right, you're going to do it. So they set up an assemblage of thousands of people and hundreds in these primary committees, and we spent 10 months with them, and they developed a plan, and now those peer assemblages are in the 6th year. So the government is no longer the decider anymore. They're the facilitator. They bring together everyone across the regions, and together they create a plan so there's no backlash. There's no backlash in this region. And why do we do this? Because then you can scale it. You cannot come in and keep doing pilot projects. Even the big companies, they don't go anywhere. If an entire region has a plan, and these plans are 500 pages long, they're open source. Go up on our website, you can see them. If an entire region does it, and then they stay involved as peer assemblages for years across 3 generations, they can move to scale whole social housing districts, whole commercial districts in the time frame the UN has set out. We have 1,200 projects now in Haute-de-France. We're now in the 23 cities of Rotterdam to The Hague, the petrochemical complex, all of Luxembourg. Come and visit. And the region of northern France, which was the Rust Belt, they were awarded the Entrepreneurial Region of Europe Award 3 years in, thousands of jobs. Let me get to jobs finally. While we're moving to an automated world, we have 2 last generations of massive employment to lay out this infrastructure, and robots and AI won't do it. Once the infrastructure in, it's smart, small workforces, and then we're going to shift employment. We're not going to give people money to do nothing. We know where the employment's going to shift in 40 years from now, to the social economy, the nonprofit sector, social capital, because machines are not going to raise a 2-year-old in a child care center. Robots are going to bring them the orange juice. They're not going to raise them, or healthcare, or education. And we're going to have to digitalize a lot of it, but most of it is human capital. So, robots and AI will not decommission the entire fossil fuel complex. Do you know that Citibank has now said that there's $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry? It's the biggest bubble in all of history. It's coming. 100 trillion. So, robots and AI will not decommission the entire fossil fuel nuclear complex. You'll need human beings, semi-skilled, skilled, and professionals. Robots and AI will not put solar in your roof and put wind turbines up. You ever seen a wind turbine put up? There's no robot that can do that. Human beings. Robots and AI will not dig down underground cable for 5G and put it in. That's human beings. Robots and AI will not set up the intricate infrastructure that you need with the Internet of Things. It goes on and on. So we already know in Europe and the places we have created a huge amount of jobs, massive. We can get 2 generations, bring everybody back to work. We're seeing it across some parts of Europe right now. So let me end with this. We have Smart Europe. We have Internet plus China. Our current 5-year plan, you know how many automobiles we're putting out electric in China these 5 years? 5 million. That's just the start, just to get it going. But what I'm going to say to you here this morning, all of you are digitally oriented. You're here because you're in the digital 3rd industrial revolution. The first was steam power, that industrial revolution. The second was analog electricity. The 3rd is digital. There's no such thing as the 4th. That's a creature of the World Economic Forum about AI and robots. It's just silly. All right? It's totally silly. But what I'm going to say to you is that technology doesn't do it alone. The technology enables, and what we've said to governments, when we meet governments and regions, we say, if you have another plan to address climate change, bring everyone back to work, and hopefully decarbonize society, tell us what it is. Tell us. And I always get silence everywhere. This is the only plan that can move us off the carbon really quickly in energy, electricity, transport, mobility, the building structures, everywhere. But it's not enough. We're going to have to change consciousness. What's happening is people are either asleep or in denial or thinking it's all over, because we do not have a new narrative that's strong enough to say to the human race, we need to do this, we need to give this a try, this is our last best chance. So what I think is important is consciousness is beginning to change, and you'll be the judge of it, because most of you are under 40. You can see whether this makes any sense. I'm beginning to see the seeds of a new form of consciousness among digital natives under 40. And how you define freedom, pretty basic, power, very basic, and identity to community. Freedom. My generation and every generation before me, beginning with the Enlightenment, we believe freedom was the ability to be independent, self-sufficient, an island to ourselves, not beholden to others, And I should have the right by society letting me do what I want to do for my life, and I don't bother anyone else, right? We define this as negative freedom, exclusivity, to be independent. For a generation that grew up on the internet, the idea of being an island to oneself and totally autonomous and self-sufficient, that's death. If I took away the smartphones in this room for you for 2 days, I guarantee you what's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of therapy going on here, right? All right? So what's interesting here is that we have a generation in this room. For you, freedom is the ability to flourish. And flourish means to the extent that you can have network after network and create community after community, you feel like you have more freedom because freedom is inclusivity, access over ownership. Inclusivity means being able to network and be engaged with so many different people at so many different levels through the smart technology, correct? If you were to be isolated and just an island to yourself, like in the second industrial revolution, that would be death. That's a ballpark change in the way we define freedom. Power. We always define power as a pyramid from the one to the many. But if you grow up on an internet and you see the ability of open source to create network effects where everybody benefits by everybody else, and each individual social capital is improved by the network you're in open source, that's a completely different idea about freedom. It's lateral. It is lateral. It's sharing. It's open source. We've seen this in 3D printing with fab labs being set up all over the world so people can participate in fabrication manufacturing and share all that software with each other all over the world. That's a complete change in the dynamic. Finally, and maybe most important, I think we're beginning to see a shift in how we identify with community. I grew up in a post-Westphalian world. Every nation is a sovereign. And within each nation, every citizen is a sovereign of that nation. And each citizen competes with every other citizen for scarce resources in the market zero-sum game. The nation-states compete with other nation-states in the market and the battlefield for scarce resources, zero-sum game. I don't have to remind you here in Europe, we fought 2 world wars, coal in the Ruhr Valley and oil up in the Bosphorus. A lot of people died. We now have a generation of young people coming home with biosphere consciousness, not geopolitical consciousness. The biosphere is only 19 kilometers, really, from the stratosphere to the lithosphere to the oceans. And within that 19 kilometers, all of the spheres of the planet interact with the chemistry of the planet and biology to create life. It's amazing. It's incredible. We're just beginning to try to understand it. We have young people coming home with biosphere consciousness, 15-year-olds, and they're saying to their father, why are you using so much water while you're shaving? We've got wildfires and droughts in the next community. Turn it off. Why is that electricity on that TV is on for 3 weeks in another room? No one's ever been in that room. Turn it off. Why 2 cars? Why not get rid of one and car share? Take the choice. We got young people coming home. This is the one my wife and I are particularly fond of because of our animal rights work. We got kids coming home and asking where the beef is, why that hamburger is on the table. Where'd that hamburger come from? Did it come from a rainforest? A lot of the beef does. Did they have to burn down those trees to get 6 inches of topsoil to graze 1 cow for this burger? And the young people know that when they burn those trees in that tropical rainforest to graze that cow on that soil for the burger, there's wild animal life that only live, those species, in those particular rainforests. They don't live anywhere else. They go extinct really quick. And if the trees aren't there because they're burned for the topsoil for the burger, they're not absorbing CO2 anymore from global warming emissions from industrial cities. That means the temperature of the planet's going up. And that means some farmer in India, she or he cannot feed their children because they're getting destructed by spring floods and summer droughts and even wildfires, literally because of that hamburger. They're learning ecological footprint. You can measure it. High school kids are doing it. They're learning that everything we do intimately affects someone else. So the whole libertarian idea that I should be able to do anything I want as long as it doesn't impact anyone else, it's absurd. Everything we do, every moment of our life, intimately affects some other human, some other animal, some other creature, some other ecosystem. This is real. It's not academic. The cruel, hard lesson of climate change is we're all intimately connected, and all of our choices, every moment affects everyone else and every species and every ecosystem. That's the cruel but important lesson. If we can understand that, we can begin this journey. So in closing, we've got a whole generation here in Switzerland in this room. You are at the cusp and the edge on the technology revolution, digital, correct? Step back tomorrow morning when you get to the office, have a cup of coffee, step back, and ask, what am I doing here with my startup? How am I contributing to this narrative? Are there ways I can find a business model so my startup is connected into a 20-year build-out of the biggest infrastructure shift in history, communication, energy, mobility, logistics, the shift in the built environment, the Internet of Things? And then come together across Switzerland. Bring all of this digital community together across Switzerland. You have the cantons. They are tailor-made for each canton, developing their own roadmap. You haven't done it here yet. So create a movement. So aside from your day job, part of that is to bring together the entire digital community in Switzerland, all 3 regions of Switzerland, all the cantons, and we will have them visit northern France, and we'll have them visit the Netherlands and Luxembourg where they're in deployment. They can see the problems, the challenges, how they're setting up their roadmaps. Then this is good to make sure your businesses are at the centerpiece of a great revolution to move us into a green era. We've got 10, 15, 20 years. There has never been a challenge like this in human history. You're going to have children and grandchildren who are going to dread their birth if we can't turn this around. We're going to turn this around. Switzerland has all the technology available. You've got a young group here that's on fire. Tomorrow morning, move Switzerland. Thank you.